I wasn't supposed to still be connected to it. That was the whole point. That was the agreement. That was the promise. It had been years since I last thought about it. Years since the conversations, the paperwork, the quiet understanding that everything had been resolved, closed, finished, over. At least that's what I believed. Life had moved on the way life always does. Slowly, then completely. Different routines, different priorities, different future. The past had stayed where it belonged, behind me, until one ordinary Tuesday morning when I logged into my account and saw something that shouldn't have been there. At first, I thought it was a mistake, a glitch, some leftover system error that hadn't caught up with reality, because it didn't make sense. It couldn't make sense. My name was still listed. Not in the past, not in history, in the present, active, responsible, connected. I stared at the screen, waiting for it to correct itself, waiting for the system to refresh and restore the version of reality I had trusted. It didn't. Nothing changed, because systems don't reflect what you believe. They reflect what you signed. And signatures don't disappear just because time passes. I leaned back in my chair, trying to remember the exact moment everything was supposed to end. It had been calm, civil, clean. We had agreed to separate responsibilities, divide everything fairly, move forward independently. That was the word everyone used. Independently. Which implied separation, which implied freedom, which implied closure. But closure, I realized, isn't always mutual. Sometimes closure is emotional, not legal. Sometimes closure is spoken, not signed. Sometimes closure is assumed, not confirmed. And assumptions don't rewrite contracts. I opened the account details, scrolling slowly, carefully, as if moving too fast might reveal something worse. My name wasn't secondary. It wasn't listed as past. It wasn't listed as inactive. It was current, fully attached, fully responsible. My stomach tightened, not from panic, but from recognition. Recognition of something I hadn't fully understood at the time. Because understanding requires clarity, and clarity isn't always offered when trust is involved. Trust simplifies things. Trust removes suspicion. Trust replaces verification. And verification is what protects you, not trust. I tried to trace it back in my mind. The conversations, the assurances, the quiet statements meant to reassure me everything had been handled. You don't need to worry. That was the phrase he had used. You don't need to worry. Not, you've been officially removed. Not, you're no longer legally connected. Just, you don't need to worry. Worry is emotional. Responsibility is legal. And emotional reassurance doesn't remove legal responsibility. Documentation does. I searched my records, opening old emails, archived folders, digital spaces I hadn't visited in years. Nothing clearly confirmed my removal. Nothing explicitly stated my name had been taken off. Because I had never asked for confirmation, I had trusted the promise, trusted the explanation, trusted the intention. Trust feels efficient. Verification feels uncomfortable. And discomfort is something people avoid when they believe they're safe. I logged out, then logged back in, hoping the act itself might correct the error. It didn't. Because it wasn't an error. It was reality. Reality doesn't correct itself to match belief. It reflects agreement. And agreement doesn't expire without action. That was the moment I understood something permanent had survived something I thought was temporary. My name had never left. It had simply waited until I noticed. I didn't panic. Not immediately. Panic requires surprise. And somewhere beneath the surface, beneath the assumptions and the trust and the years of not thinking about it, there was a quiet awareness that I had never actually seen proof. I had heard words, I had accepted reassurance, but I had never seen confirmation. And confirmation is the only thing that makes something real. I logged back into the account later that night. The room was darker now, quieter, the kind of quiet that makes truth easier to hear, even when you don't want to hear it. The balance was still there, unchanged, not closed, not transferred, not resolved. Active. That word mattered more than anything else. Active meant present. Active meant connected. Active meant mine, not emotionally, legally. I opened the detailed information section, reading slowly, forcing myself to absorb every line. There it was again, my full name. No indication of removal, no indication of separation, no indication that anything had changed, because nothing had. I checked the payment history. There were payments, but not consistently, not reliably. Gaps, delays, missed cycles. Enough inconsistency to create risk, enough instability to create consequences. And consequences, I knew, don't announce themselves until they've already begun. I closed the laptop and sat there in silence. Not angry, not yet, just aware. Awareness comes before emotion. Awareness comes before reaction. Awareness is what replaces denial. I picked up my phone and opened my credit report. It loaded slowly, revealing information I hadn't needed to think about in years. Most of it looked familiar, stable, predictable, normal, until I saw it. The account, still listed, still open, still connected to me. Not as history, as present responsibility. My score hadn't collapsed, not yet, but it had been affected. Small changes, subtle declines, the kind that don't feel urgent until they become permanent. Credit doesn't collapse all at once. It erodes, gradually, quietly, without permission, without warning, without emotion. Because credit isn't emotional, it's mathematical. It reflects risk. And risk, I realized, still included me. I called the bank the next morning because I needed clarity. Because clarity replaces hope with reality. After verifying my identity, the representative spoke calmly, professional, neutral, uninvolved. As a co-signer, she explained, you remain fully responsible for the account until it is paid off or refinanced solely in the primary account holder's name. Fully responsible. Not temporarily responsible, not partially responsible. Fully. Responsibility doesn't expire with time. It expires with resolution. And resolution hadn't happened. I asked the question I already knew the answer to. Is there any indication my name was ever removed? She paused briefly. I'm sorry, she said. There is no record of removal. No record. Because removal requires action, documentation, completion, not intention, not discussion, not promise, action. I thanked her and ended the call. Not because I felt better, because I understood. Understanding doesn't fix things, it clarifies them. And clarity, even when painful, is more stable than uncertainty. I sat there for a long time, holding my phone, staring at nothing. Not thinking about him, not thinking about blame, thinking about responsibility. Responsibility doesn't belong to the person who promised, it belongs to the person who signed. And I had signed. That truth didn't change based on fairness. It didn't change based on trust. It didn't change based on intention. It existed because agreement had created it. And agreement, I was beginning to understand, doesn't dissolve quietly. It remains until someone resolves it. The consequences didn't arrive all at once. They arrived quietly, in small moments, moments that didn't seem connected at first, until they were. It started when I applied for something simple, something routine, something I had done before without hesitation. A new apartment. Nothing extravagant, nothing unrealistic, just a different space, a different chapter, a different future. I filled out the application calmly, confidently, without concern. My income was stable, my history was clean, my life was steady. There was no reason to expect resistance, until there was. A few days later, I received the response. Not rejection, not approval. Review. Additional review required. That phrase carries weight. Not certainty, not denial, but doubt. Doubt doesn't exist without reason, and reason doesn't exist without record. I knew immediately where the doubt had come from. Not emotionally, structurally. The account. Still open, still active, still attached to my name, even though it wasn't mine in practice. It was mine in record, and record is what matters. I opened my credit report again that night. This time, I wasn't looking for reassurance. I was looking for truth. The account balance hadn't disappeared. It hadn't stabilized. It had continued. Interest had accumulated. Time had done what time always does. It had increased the cost of unresolved responsibility. Because responsibility doesn't pause when you stop looking at it. It continues. Quietly, permanently, without your awareness, without your permission, but always with your name. I called him. Not immediately, not emotionally, carefully, because emotion doesn't change facts. Facts require clarity. He answered on the second ring. His voice sounded familiar, normal, unchanged, which somehow made everything feel more distant. I saw the account, I said. Silence. Not confusion, not surprise, recognition. I thought it was taken care of, he said. Thought. Not confirmed, not completed, not resolved. Thought. Thought is what people rely on when they don't verify. Thought is what replaces action when action feels uncomfortable. It wasn't, I said quietly. Another silence. Longer this time. I've been making payments, he added. Not denial, not avoidance, but not resolution either, because payments don't remove responsibility. Completion does. Removal does. Action does. Your name is still on it, he said. Not a question, a statement, a realization he hadn't fully considered or hadn't fully addressed. I know, I said. Because knowing had become unavoidable. Knowing had replaced trusting. Knowing had replaced believing. Knowing had replaced hoping. Knowing had replaced temporary. Temporary had never existed. Only agreement had. Only signature had. Only responsibility had. I ended the call without anger, because anger doesn't resolve contracts. Action does. I sat there, in the quiet of my apartment, understanding something I hadn't fully understood before. Responsibility doesn't follow intention. It follows documentation. Documentation doesn't care about promises. Documentation cares about agreement. Agreement had created permanence, and permanence had created consequence. Not immediately, not dramatically, but steadily, which is how permanent things operate. They don't demand attention, they wait until attention becomes unavoidable. And now, attention was unavoidable, not because I wanted it to be, because it had always been there, attached, waiting, connected to me until I resolved it. Myself. I stopped waiting after that. Waiting had been the illusion. Waiting had been the comfort. Waiting had been the belief that time would solve something I had never formally resolved. But time doesn't resolve responsibility. Action does. I opened the account again, this time without hesitation, without denial, without hoping it had somehow corrected itself. It hadn't. The balance was still there, still active, still connected to my name. But this time, I wasn't looking for reassurance. I was looking for control. Control begins with acceptance. Acceptance that something exists. Acceptance that something is real. Acceptance that something belongs to you, not emotionally, but structurally. I called the bank again, this time asking different questions. Not whether my name could be removed automatically, but what would be required to remove it permanently. The answer was clear. The account had to be refinanced or paid off. Resolution wasn't emotional, it was mathematical, it was structural, it was final. I didn't feel anger, I didn't feel betrayal. I felt clarity. Clarity replaces emotion with direction. Clarity replaces uncertainty with action. Clarity replaces temporary illusions with permanent understanding. I created a plan. Not dramatic, not overwhelming, just consistent. I adjusted my budget, reduced what wasn't necessary, focused on what was. Each payment I made didn't feel like loss. It felt like movement. Movement toward independence, movement toward separation, movement toward closure. Closure isn't something someone gives you. Closure is something you create. Month after month, I made progress, slowly, quietly, without announcement. Progress rarely feels dramatic while it's happening. It feels repetitive. It feels routine. It feels invisible. Until one day, it becomes complete. My credit score began to recover, not suddenly, not completely, but steadily, because recovery doesn't arrive instantly. Recovery arrives through consistency, through action, through responsibility. Responsibility doesn't disappear because something wasn't your fault. Responsibility disappears because something was resolved. The final payment didn't feel emotional. It didn't feel victorious. It felt quiet, simple, complete. I logged into the account one last time. The balance was zero, not reduced, not minimized, zero. The word felt heavier than any number because zero meant absence. Zero meant separation. Zero meant freedom. My name was no longer attached, not emotionally, not legally, not permanently. I closed the laptop slowly, not rushing the moment, not celebrating it, understanding it. Understanding what had changed, not just the account, me. I no longer trusted promises without confirmation. I no longer believed temporary without documentation. I no longer confused reassurance with resolution. Because reassurance is emotional, resolution is structural, and structural change is the only change that lasts. My name had stayed because I had never removed it, not intentionally, not knowingly, but permanently, until I chose differently, until I acted, until I resolved what had always been mine to resolve. That was the lesson. Not about trust, not about blame, about permanence, about responsibility, about understanding that signatures don't disappear with time, they disappear with action. And this time, I had taken it, myself. Have you ever trusted someone with your name or financial future? What would you have done differently? Leave a comment. Your experience might help someone avoid the same mistake.